I'm not quite sure how it's happened, but I've somehow managed to completely miss out on one of the best bands of the last 35 years. Why the hell do more people not talk about Throwing Muses? Welcome to 2020 Sound, the channel where we take a look back at the overlooked and underrated in indie and alternative rock history. If you're interested in watching more videos along those lines, then do please give us a subscribe. Now, the name Throwing Muses is one that I've been very familiar with for a long time, but I've never actually heard their music until last year. And it amazes me that I've been so underexposed to this band because I've been listening to this kind of music since I was 12. At least over here in the UK, since the mid-90s, I've never seen them on television, I've never heard any of their music on the radio, I've never seen a documentary about them, I've never seen a big magazine article about them, I've never seen other bands mention them. I think the most exposure that I've had to them up to now came from the song Snakeface, appearing on the soundtrack to the cult classic movie Empire Records. Snake, one more button undone. But even then, I didn't know that song was by them until last week. For all their sins, I've actually got Spotify and Facebook algorithms to thank for opening the door to Throwing Muses to me. It was the songs Counting Backwards, Not Too Soon, and Bright Yellow Gun, that all appeared as suggestions on Spotify, and I enjoyed all of them thoroughly. And I kept seeing their name appearing in a few Facebook groups that I'm in. So I thought, you know, it's about time to take a dive into this band's back catalogue. So I started at one of their most exalted albums, The Real Ramona. And not only did it provide further evidence to me that 1991 is one of the greatest years in musical history, but it opened up this wormhole of their back catalogue that is just full of wonderfully weird, beautifully melodic, arse-kickingly energetic, utterly charming music. So I did what I imagine many of the people watching this right now would do when they've discovered an established band. I went on YouTube looking for a documentary or a primer or something to act as, you know, an introduction to this band. And there was nothing, you know, apart from a few interviews here and there and of course performances and music videos. There's very little to serve as a good basic introduction to the group. So that's kind of what I want this video to be. Now, unlike any of the other videos that I do, where I'm pretty familiar with the artist, obviously in this case I've known Throwing Muses for all of about 5 minutes, so I'm sure there's people watching this now who are far more qualified to talk about them than I am. With that in mind, please use the comments section to share any interesting details about the band or interesting stories, or just share what you love about them, and do feel free to correct anything that I have got wrong. I'm trying to get it all accurate, but it would be great if we could turn this video into, you know, a resource for anyone getting into the band. One of the first things that struck me as I looked into their history was the sheer talent of the musicians at such a young age. Throwing Muses were formed in Rhode Island in 1983 when the band were actually in high school. It was formed by singer Kristin Hersh, who also was the chief songwriter and lead guitarist, and her stepsister Tanya Donelly, who, when she started in the band, apparently they used to play gigs with mannequins on stage and she would play keyboards propped on an ironing board, until she eventually switched to rhythm guitar. And she also shares vocal duties and some of the songwriting too. Leslie Langston and Dave Narciso completed the first lineup of the band to get a recording contract on bass and drums respectively. Narciso had never actually played a drum kit before. He'd had experience playing in marching bands and played concert drums, but he never played a full kit. So when he managed to get his hands on one, the one that he'd borrowed off someone turned up without any cymbals, which meant he learned to play the drums without any hi-hats, rides, crashes, or any of that stuff. So when you listen to Throwing Muses' early stuff, there's no cymbals in it, which gives it a really distinctive sound. They released their debut self-titled EP on their own Blowing Fuses label in 1984 and followed it up with a collection of demos called the Doghouse cassette in 1985, which gave them a #1 college radio hit with the song Sinkhole.
There's no water on the land, and it's all because of sin.
After that, they became the first American band to sign to legendary British independent label 4AD, releasing their self-titled debut album on the label in 1986. At the time of the album's release, the band members had just turned 20, meaning that the recording would have taken place when they were 19. Now, I've talked about this kind of thing before on the Caius video that I did, and I don't know how many of you were in bands when you were 19, or if you had any friends that were in bands when you were 19, but most bands that I've seen with teenagers in can barely play a cohesive gig, let alone create music this inventive and unique. It's a truly staggering achievement. On this album, they're already crystallising everything that I really love about this band's music, in particular their approach to song structure. I think what the Pixies did for dynamics in indie rock, Throwing Muses did for song structure. The Pixies are a band intrinsically linked to Throwing Muses, in part because they became the second American band, I believe, to sign to 4AD after Throwing Muses as a result of their close connection to the band. And they also supported Throwing Muses on what was the Pixies' first UK tour in 1988. In fact, someone called Brian created this cute subway map showing all the ties between the two bands. And the Pixies often get praised for the whole quiet verses, loud choruses thing, which supposedly Nirvana ripped off on Smells Like Teen Spirit. And while they're hardly the first band to use such sharp changes in dynamics, they certainly wielded it with such frequency and made such a feature of it that it became a hallmark of their sound. The same, I think, can be said of Throwing Muses and their approach to song structure. They often veer away from that traditional verse, chorus, verse kind of pattern. Tanya Donelly told The Quietus that the first album she can remember from childhood is the Beatles' Abbey Road, which I presume means it was probably a big formative influence on her stepsister Kristin as well. That would make a lot of sense. Abbey Road's second side is renowned for its suite of music, where all the tracks from Sun King onwards run together and collide. It's all wonderfully melodic, but paying no attention to traditional structure and sewing all these ideas together in a way that is thrillingly unpredictable. I think Throwing Muses took that approach and applied it to the punk and the indie and the college rock and the new wave that they were hearing at that time, and it gave them this unique thing. There's bits of X and R.E.M. and the Violent Femmes and the Velvet Underground and Husker Du maybe in their makeup, but ultimately they have very much their own distinct, unique style. Ironically, Black Francis apparently took a lot of vocal inspiration from the way Paul McCartney sings Oh Darling, so it's clear that Abbey Road had a big influence on at least two of the bands on the 4AD label. What I love most about discovering this music is that it sounds so familiar and yet so unexpected. I think sometimes when you're trying to get into music that breaks those traditional pop structures, it's a bit like trying to learn a new language. I remember the first time that I heard My Bloody Valentine, aged 14, and my Britpop attuned brain was just absolutely, repelled by this thing. It took me a long time to appreciate exactly what was going on. With Throwing Muses, all the traditional elements that I love in rock and pop music are already there, great hooks, beautiful melodies, amazing harmonies. The sound of Kristin, Hersh and Tanya Donelly's vocals together is just beautiful. And they've got such a great crunch to their guitar attack. But the way that they implement those elements with the tempo changes and the time signature changes and the key changes and so on and so forth, it just makes it sound so fresh and invigorating even to this day. Fascinating music is often made by fascinating people, and Hersh's backstory and relationship to her music is nothing if not fascinating. So the story goes, she began having dissociative episodes and auditory hallucinations after she was hit by a car when she was riding a bike as a teenager. In her memoir, Paradoxical Undressing, she describes hearing her songs as a result of that incident. This wasn't music coming from inside of her that she wanted to express, rather this was music that she could hear externally that she was compelled to try and capture. She wrote, "I watched and listened, bewildered and enthralled, as sound and colour filled my empty hospital room." She described music as something she has almost no control over, like well-rehearsed Tourette's. After finding some relief through things like acupuncture, she told The Guardian in 2010, "I was never sure if the music was disease or therapy anyway. I've tried many times, but the songs don't stop. The songs come very clearly now. I can hear them better." As she said, Kristin's songwriting has never really ever slowed down. She's been incredibly prolific, and through Throwing Muses, as well as her solo recordings and her work with the band 50 Foot Wave, and that's not including Tanya Donelly and her work with the band Belly and her own solo recordings, I feel like I've opened this can of worms of stuff. Actually, well, it's not a can of worms, you know, it's all quality. I feel like I've opened a chocolate selection box at Christmas. It's a tin of Quality Street, that's what it is. If you're new to the band like me, then to be honest, everything that I've heard right up until 2020's Sun Racket album, I've really enjoyed. But if you're looking for a place to start, it'd be remiss of me not to recommend the Real Ramona. Counting Backwards has been in my head for days.
Counting backwards, I count you in. I don't remember.
Not Too Soon has a chorus that is literally just Tanya making guitar noises with her mouth that is so cute, it does kind of make me fall in love with her a little bit. Hook in Her Head is a great example of one of their best gear shifting songs, and it contains some phenomenally abrasive guitar work. Their first 4 albums are probably the best place to start in terms of LPs. My favourite being that self-titled debut from 1986. It still feels incredibly raw and unfiltered. That's on Spotify along with the Doghouse demos in a compilation called A Doghouse. There's an argument to be made for quite a few of those mid to late 80s American alternative rock bands not getting their due, and I've talked elsewhere about Bob Mould potentially being the most underrated songwriter in American alt-rock history. But it really does feel to me like Throwing Muses are probably the most underrated band of that generation. It's baffling to me that they haven't achieved greater recognition, because they've created a body of work that is so timeless and still sounds so inventive and exciting, that this band that are now nearly 40 years old have become my favourite new band. Thanks so much for watching. If you've been listening to Throwing Muses for years, then do please reply in the comments and tell us your stories about the band and what you love about them. If the band are new to you too, then do please check them out, because I thoroughly recommend it. And if you'd like to watch further videos all about underrated and overlooked music from indie and alternative rock history, then do please subscribe.